So I'd like to start by saying that it wasn't that I didn't want a student to shadow me. It's that I don't think it would be very interesting to spend an entire day watching me grade papers or teach class. So I suggested that you consider my good friend Meg Casper, who's a graduate of the school and who's spent a lot of time working in government PR, public affairs, and is a great professional and a very devoted alumni of the school, alumnus of the school. So please sign up to and pray that you get to shadow Meg, because you'll make a new friend and learn a lot. So when I was invited to speak, I was first of all very honored to be invited to speak to this group. I've been here on the faculty of the school now for this is entering my 9th year, and I see these meetings over the years go on, and I think this may be the first time I've actually attended a PRSSA meeting, which is kind of crazy, but I'm really well aware of the energy that is always in this room. I've had several offices in this building over the years, and I've been here when you were meeting, and always felt the energy. And as the former advisor for the political communication student organization, I was always envious of what you had here, because you have great attendance and a lot of energy, and you do a lot. And so I really commend you for all that you do and for the contribution you make to this school, and the way you take seriously preparing for your professional careers. This is the work, this work you're doing, attending these meetings and being involved in various ways, is going to pay incredible dividends to you when you graduate and leave this place and go out into the world and try to find that job. Before I sort of launch into what I want to say today, I want to bring your attention to a piece that's in the New York Times this morning. If you don't read the New York Times, you really ought to, because you learn a lot. But there's a great article in there this morning that says that the two most important things that you can have for your career if you're a college student are a mentor who takes an interest in you, who does all the kind of things that a mentor would do as far as life advice and just being there for you, and also helping you figure out what you want to do in your career, and an internship. And that students who have a mentor and do an internship, or do one or the other or both, perform so much better when they get out of school, get better jobs, have better opportunities available to them. So find a mentor, and and usually those mentors for you are going to be faculty members. And so, but not always. They don't have to be faculty members. They can be someone like Meg Casper, who is a professional, who's an alumnus of this university, of this school, who still hangs around and is active on the alumni board. Get to know those people. And a lot of times you find those mentors by doing an internship, by going into a workplace and meeting people and getting to know them, and adopting that person as someone you want to rely on. I have mentors from my college career. I have mentors who are still, I'm 56 years old. I still have mentors from my college career who I call when I have a hard decision to make. My college economics professor, Dave Norris, is still someone that I talk to almost every week. And if I have a difficult decision, Dave is going to be one of the first people I call. Richard Baxter, who is the director of my journalism department in college, is still someone I talk to quite often and stay in touch with, and still someone I respect a lot. Most of the people who mentored me in my early career are still mentors in my life. So when you a lot of times when you have a mentor, it's someone you're going to be knowing for the rest of your life, and helping you. Is going to be helping you for the rest of your life. It's a life, truly a life-changing thing. So find a mentor. Speaking of mentors, and speaking of my friend Richard Baxter, who was my journalism professor and head of the department, I went to the university, what was then called Northeast Louisiana University, now the University of Louisiana Monroe, who will be playing right across the way here on Saturday. My son, as I was driving him to school the other day, said, "Who are you rooting for, Dad?" And I refused to say, because I know that's really bad form. So I can't disclose who I'm rooting for. But when I'll never forget the day that I was walking across the walking from one building to another with who I then called Dr. Baxter, who now is Richard to me, and he said, Bob, you ever thought of being a press secretary to a member of Congress? I guess I was asking him for advice on what I should do with my life, and he saw some promise or something in me that I didn't see myself. It never occurred to me to do something like that. I started out as an accounting major, and when I made a D in accounting, I decided, well, maybe accounting wouldn't be. So luckily, that was in my first semester in college, and it was plenty of time to change majors. And I started thinking, what do I want to do? Well, it occurred to me that I wanted to go into PR. And that's been over 30 years ago, so I have no idea why PR was appealing to me at that time. Accounting, PR, they're not really that related, so I don't know why I thought that was a great thing to do. But at my school, there was no public relations curriculum. There was journalism. There was print journalism and broadcast journalism, and that was it. There was no advertising. There was certainly no political communication like we have here. There was journalism, and so somebody told me, or I read somewhere, that if you want to go into PR, journalism is a good thing to do, or being a journalist is a good route to PR. So after giving it about that much thought, I went and changed my major. It's amazing how sometimes these capricious decisions change your life, and I know some of you probably think about it a lot more than I did. Because I literally described my thought process in changing my major just now. I mean, it was about that complicated. So I go and I become a journalism major. Well, lo and behold, I fall in love with journalism, and I realize, oh my God, this is what I was meant to be. I was meant to be a journalist. I mean, I loved journalism, and I was already a newspaper reader and very interested in politics. It wasn't like it was totally out of left field for me, but I fell in love with it. I fell in love with journalism, and I worked as a journalist throughout my career in college, working as a radio reporter for several radio stations in Monroe. And when I graduated, I went to work for the local newspaper in Monroe, the Monroe News Star, a Gannett paper, still a very strong newspaper in Monroe. And they sent me over to Ruston, which is a little small town in North Louisiana. And I was the Ruston bureau chief, which sounds really good, except I was the only employee in the bureau, but I was the chief of that bureau, and it was a great experience. And I commend that kind of thing to you. I know that a lot of you probably will want to, when you graduate, will want to go find some a big agency or a big corporation, high-paying job, and you want to go do that. And if Pepsi-Cola offers you a job working in their public relations department, take it. I'm not saying don't do that, but I am also saying that the best job that I ever had in preparing myself for the work that I did and the work that I still do was that year that I spent in Ruston, Louisiana, working as the bureau chief for this daily newspaper. It was almost like working for a weekly newspaper, though, because I had to do everything. I had to cover funerals. I had to cover car wrecks. I had to cover school board meetings. I had to cover high school football games on Friday night. I mean, there was no story that happened in that little town that I didn't have to cover. And it really was a four-parish area: Union, Lincoln, Jackson, and Wynn parishes. I covered it all in that part of Louisiana. And I became I think I became a really versatile newspaper reporter. I could do this today. I could go to it. In those days, it was well before the internet, and I would go cover a news story, and I would have to go to find a payphone because we were on deadline, and I would just have to dictate from my mind and my notes, just dictate the story to someone who's typing it in on the other end. And I learned to write under deadline. I can bang out a press release or a news story and nothing flat, because I learned how to do that. And I learned how to write a lot of different stories. I learned how to cover a lot of different things. I learned how to learn fast. I walk into a room and sort of pick up what was going on and learn to write about it. I tell you all that not to brag on myself, but to say that looking back on it, if I'd been on, I would have, my dream would have been to go work down here in Baton Rouge for the Advocate or the Times-Picayune, or go work for a bigger regional newspaper off the bat. And if I had done that, if I had done that, they would have assigned me to some little obscure corner of the paper, and I would have labored in obscurity for several years before they finally let me write a story, maybe. And I would have been buttonholed into one beat, maybe education, and I would have developed an expertise in education, but that would have been what I did. You know, that would have set my career trajectory in some way. And I say that because if you got the opportunity to go to a smaller firm or a smaller organization when you graduate, jump at that opportunity. It may not pay as much, but it will pay so much more in long-term dividends for you because you will be forced to do so much more. It will cause you to be so much more versatile. There's dignity in being the person who comes in the morning and makes the coffee and sweeps up in the evening. There's a lot of dignity in that, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with being the indispensable person in the office because you're doing so much. And when you're doing that, you're learning. So if you have the opportunity to go to a small organization, a small firm where you're going to have to do a little bit of everything, embrace that because it'll make you so much more valuable in your next job or the job after that because you'll have skills that a lot of your colleagues don't have because they will have been in a big firm doing one thing or a couple of things. And they'll be good at that, and so they'll have some expertise, but they won't have broad experience. And so go find if you can some place to get broad experience. That was the best thing for me in journalism, and it's held me in good stead all through my career even when I went into politics. So I did that for a few years and went back to Monroe and worked there covering city government, and went to Shreveport in the early 80s and was a political writer for the Shreveport Journal where I was covering political races all over Louisiana. My friend, I guess my former friend now, I wrote a column about him the other day, and we're no longer really friends. Edwin Edwards, who's running for Congress, from this district, was running for his third term as governor. And I had I spent 2 months on the road with him, just me and him and an aide riding around the back of the car all over Louisiana. I got to do and see really interesting things, and it was a really fun job as a political journalist, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to maybe make the next step, go to Dallas, and go to the Dallas Morning News and cover politics in Texas, or maybe even go to Washington. So in November of 1984, it was in 85. No, it was 84. It was November of 84. Governor Edwards he'd been elected governor, and now he was indicted for the first time. Those of you who are not from Louisiana, just bear with me. This is you may have picked up on the problem that we have in the state sometimes with our politics. But he was about to go on trial, and my papers sent me up to Washington, and they wanted me to write a story about his lawyer, who was a Washington lawyer. So I go up to Washington. I'm there to write a story about this guy. And while I'm there, I go by to see a friend of mine who was chief of staff to Senator Bennett Johnson, who was the junior senator from Louisiana in the U.S. Senate at that time. And his name was Darrell Owen. He was from Shreveport. So I thought I'll go write a little feature story about Darrell, this Shreveport guy who's the chief of staff to a U.S. senator, a hometown boy, done good. So I go by and see Darrell, and as we're talking, he says, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a press secretary to a member of Congress?" And I remembered what Richard Baxter had said to me just a few years earlier, but I remember saying, "No, I really haven't." Well, that was kind of a lie because I thought about it, but it wasn't a burning passion of mine. I was really trying to figure out ways I could get a job in journalism while I was up there. I went by to visit with a few friends of mine who were editors, interviewed for one job, which I didn't get, but Darrell said, "Well, Russell Long is looking for a press secretary. His press secretary, Rafael Bermudez, has just decided to move back to Baton Rouge and start a PR firm, and he's looking for a press secretary." He said, "Would you like to talk to them?" And so I said, absolutely. I mean, suddenly it seemed like the greatest thing in the world. You know, I hadn't thought about it 2 seconds earlier, and now I was thinking, yeah, absolutely. So I go over and meet with his staff that afternoon, and about 2 weeks later, Senator Long comes to Shreveport, and I interview with him, and about 2 weeks later, they call and offer me the job, and 2 weeks later, I'm living in Washington, D.C. And it sort of reinforces what I tell young people especially high school, young people in high school, but also my students, is that a lot of times we think we know what we want to do with our lives. We think that we've got this 5-year plan. We think we know where we're going. We've got this objective, and we're not going to let anything deter us from getting there. We're single-minded. That's good. I mean, I know a lot of you are like that. I know some of you, and I know how driven you are and how goal-oriented you are. But there's a saying you may have heard. It's an old saying, kind of trite, but it's true. I found it to be very true. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. You've heard people say that. Well, it's really true. And I've learned over the years that some of the smartest decisions I've made were decisions that just sort of were opportunities that just presented themselves, and I went with it. And it for me, in a couple of cases, it involved a drastic change of career. I just said, somebody said, "Would you want to do this?" And well, yeah, I think maybe I do want to do that. And I ended up starting out going to be PR, ended up in journalism, wound up in politics, and now for over 8 years teaching at a university. And every job that I've had, I've enjoyed. Every job that I've had, I can look back and see just how it all developed. But every job I've had, I've absolutely loved. I've absolutely been thrilled with my jobs, and love what I do, and love the people that I work for, and can say that everything that I've done before I got here prepared me to do what I do here, and everything that I did in the last job, before the last job, prepared me for that job. But none of it was planned. It was all just just being open to opportunities, listening to people, and being open to, well, would you like to do this, or would you like to just interview for this? Well, that's not the job I want, but I'll go talk to them, you know. And sometimes when you go talk to somebody, you may not take that job, but you made a contact that, 5 years later, that person comes back in your life in a different way, and the next thing you know, you've got just the job you want. So I spent 20 years, ended up spending 20 years in politics. That's the other thing that I should say, is when Senator Long offered me the job, I thought, okay, this is great, because I'll go to Washington for 2 years, and I'll learn to be a better political reporter. And I'll go back into journalism, and I'll be the best political reporter there ever was. Well, I got into politics. I got into doing what I was doing, and I loved it. I just loved politics. I loved being in Washington. I loved being around, working in a Senate office. I loved working on Capitol Hill. I loved being in an office building where every day you turned the corner and you were running into a U.S. senator, going with Senator Long to the White House, and later when I went to work for his successor, Senator Brough, having all kinds of great experiences. I just fell in love with it, and committed myself to that life of working in government and doing political, public affairs for a member of Congress. And it was a great job, and I'm glad that I did it, and I don't regret doing it at all. It doesn't mean I want to go back to it. I'm really happy doing what I do now. But it was a great job, and I don't know how many of you. When I was, as I said, when I was in college, it was not something that there was no training for it in my school. It was journalism. I had to sort of learn on my own. No one taught me how to do even public relations. I mean, I was studying journalism. I was studying how to write news stories. No one taught me public relations. I told my class yesterday, no one taught me ethics. I mean, there was no ethics course. There was no media ethics or journalism ethics course taught in my school. I hope there is now, but at the time there wasn't. So much of what I had to learn in politics was just observing other people, finding mentors. I was lucky enough to work for people who I think were pretty honest and ethical in the way they conducted their business. So I didn't go to work for people who were always cutting corners and encouraging me to lie on their behalf. I know people who've been in that situation. But here's what I learned in doing that work, and here's what I think made me moderately successful in doing it, but more importantly, really happy in what I did. And that is that, and I don't think this is, I'm going to talk to a group next week, a group of communications directors for state legislatures are having a meeting here in Baton Rouge at the state capitol, and they invited me to come talk to them. I'm going to tell them some of this. But I was really lucky to work in the Senate at a time when the place was still pretty bipartisan, where Republicans got along with Democrats, where they weren't in these warring camps entirely like they are now, where you could actually collaborate with people on the other side if you were a senator or even staff, and you could get work done. And for example, I was, for quite a while, my girlfriend was the press secretary to Senator John Danforth from Missouri, who was a Republican, and I was working for a Democrat. And no one in my office thought, and her office thought there was anything untoward about that. Today, I'm not so sure that wouldn't be frowned upon, that you're consorting with the enemy there. In those days, nobody thought anything. Nobody would even remark about, "Well, you're dating a Republican?" I mean, no one even said that. It was totally unremarkable. Today, I'm sure I would get all kinds of remarks like that. So I was lucky to be in that kind of environment where it wasn't as adversarial as it is now. But I also think that I was really, really, really fortunate that I came out of journalism. I'm not criticizing public relations, the study of public relations at all, because I believe it's really important. And I know you're going to enter your profession knowing so much more about public relations than I knew when I started. It took me years and years of making a lot of mistakes to learn that. But the one thing that I did know, and this is where I would encourage you to consider doing an internship at a newspaper or a TV station or some sort of news organization. The one thing I did know that made me happy and successful, I think, in my job in politics, is I knew how reporters thought. Because I had been one, and I'd been one for a number of years. I had a journalism degree, and I'd worked as a journalist, and I knew how reporters thought. I knew what they needed. I knew when they needed it. I knew the lingo of when I was talking to them. We were talking the same language, and I had credibility with them because I was one of them. I think some reporters look at people like me who leave journalism and go into politics as sort of a traitor to the field, and there was maybe a little bit more of that then than there even is now, because it's people go back and forth so much. But I had credibility that a lot of people didn't have because they'd never been a journalist. And so I would encourage you, if you have that opportunity, to go spend some time interning at a news organization. Go work at the Rebel League if that's all you can do. But get some experience so you really know, not just in an intellectual sense, but you really know in a real tactile sense what it's like to work in a news organization. I tell my students that here's the one thing that I think a lot of people in PR, especially in political PR, fail to understand about journalists. It's just this one little thing that, if you really think about it, it would help you a lot and save you a lot of grief, save you and your organization a lot of grief. I always ask, at the end of the day, what does a journalist really want to do? I mean, what's really important to a journalist? Anybody have an idea? What do they want to do? Yeah.
Get the story out.
Get the story out. You're very close. That's almost bingo. What do journalists really? At the end of the day, what does a journalist want? The truth? Oh, okay. Danielle, you're going to be. I'm not out. What they find really fundamentally something more practical. What do they want? A byline? Yeah, that's true. To write. To what? To write. Okay. That's all correct. The truth is really good. They want to go home. They want to go home. They just want to go home. They have family. They have children. They want to go eat, but they want to see their wife. They want to watch a little football. It's Thursday night. They want to go home and have a beer, and they want to they want to go home. And how many times have you heard of reporters who are sitting around waiting for 3 hours for the governor to get back to them with the quote that they needed or the information they needed to finish off their story? And they're trying to be fair, and the press secretary keeps telling them it's coming, or even better, I'm a journalist, and I call the governor at the governor's office at 10 in the morning, saying I need a quote for this story, and the governor's office doesn't call me back till 4:30 in the afternoon. So I sat there all day waiting for this guy to call me back, and I tell him what I need, and he says, well, you know, the governor just left. He's in a helicopter flying up to Shreveport. It'll be another couple of hours before I can get a quote from him. And so maybe I finally do go home, but my mind is still on work, and I still have to finish the story, and I've got this deadline, and it ruins my evening, because all they want to do is go home. You know that one thing about a journalist, it'll change your whole relationship. I'm trying to help the guy spend some time with his family, because the next day when he comes in, when he sees you, what is he thinking? When he sees you, what is he thinking about you? You're the person who, I got in a fight last night with my wife, and I didn't get to see my kids, and it's all because of you. Because you didn't return my phone call for 6 hours. And it's, you know, so it's to me, it's stuff like that you know, it makes sense once either someone's told it to you or you've experienced it. It makes sense that you respect the people you're working for. And that's what I see really missing in Washington, and really down at the Capitol, down at the City Hall, all across the country in politics. I see this really awful, horrible adversarial relationship. It's always been somewhat adversarial, but now it's almost like open warfare between the press secretaries, the communications directors, the public affairs people, and the press. They don't trust each other, and I think a lot of it is because they don't understand each other. They've never been in the other person's shoes. You know, I would say to a journalist, you ought to go spend some time working as a PR guy or a person, or follow the governor's press secretary around for a couple of days and see what she does, and learn about the trouble that she, I mean, you know, all the grief she's taken from you and how miserable you make her. You know, learn about that a little bit. I mean, I think that understanding would help a lot, and would result in a better product for everybody on both sides. So let me end with this. I want to share something that I wrote on my blog a couple of years ago. And the reason I share it is because it's sort of my summary of what wisdom that I feel like I accumulated in my time on Capitol Hill and working down at the state capitol. And I put it on my blog, and I was flattered that the communications director for the Centers for the Medicare system in Washington called and asked if he could put it in all the training materials for all their Washington and regional communications directors, public affairs officers. And I told them, of course, they could. And so this what I'm about to give you is something that's used in training the people who work with journalists for the Medicare system around the country. And it's a long blog post. I'm not going to give you the whole thing. I'm just going to give you my lessons that I put down after thinking about what I wish I had known, what I wish somebody had told me when I went to work in Washington in January of 1985. Number one, whining about your press coverage does not improve your press coverage. Now, usually reporters are not influenced by whining about how they didn't get it right. If you're not, this is number two, if you're not getting positive press coverage, the fault is almost always yours, not the news media's. And I think that's something that a lot of people should spend some time reflecting about. Why are we getting so beat up by the press? And it's really easy to tell your boss, well, it's because the reporter's unfair, the reporter's a jerk, the reporter doesn't know what he's doing, or she doesn't know what she's doing. But oftentimes, more often than not, I think the problem with when you're getting really bad press consistently, it's something you're doing wrong. Telling a reporter that her story is not worth covering is a very good way to ensure extensive coverage of that issue. Because you're saying, what you're basically saying is, there is something really good here that I don't want you to write about. And you're encouraging that person to dig more. So usually telling them, that's a lousy story, you don't want to do that, that's a crap story. I don't know why you want to write that story, it's not going to interest anybody. Bing, 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 bing. In her mind, it's like, wow, what are they hiding? Shouting at reporters and intimidating reporters might work in the short term, but the long-term effects of that on your news coverage and on your soul are corrosive and counterproductive. And I think I've yelled at reporters, and I regret it. And in fact, the most contentious experience that I ever had with a reporter was with John LaPlante during Katrina. I was the governor's press secretary during Katrina, and John was the bureau chief of the Advocate, who was also an adjunct here. And we had a terrible, terrible argument, and we both said things that I know we regretted because we later talked about it. But we never really fully reconciled with one another because it was just such an awful experience. And about 6 months later, John died suddenly, and I that's always bothered me that sort of I've known this guy for 25, 30 years, and the last 6 months of our friendship, we weren't really speaking or very comfortable around each other because of that very unpleasant experience we had, and a lot of it was my fault for yelling at him. And by the way, all that yelling at him didn't change the way he wrote his story, not one bit. Raising your voice, and this is the same thing. Raising your voice at a reporter is often very helpful in getting the dreaded story on the front page, which is probably what happened in that confrontation I had with John. Number 6, what they teach in college public relations courses really is true. You'll get better press coverage if you work on building relationships with reporters, not figuring out brilliant ways to manipulate them. Working well with reporters doesn't mean buying them meals or drinks. It means understanding the demands of their jobs and doing your best to help them do those jobs. They want to go home. Number 8, respect reporters and their deadlines. They are people with families with whom they'd like to spend time after writing that story about you. If you help them with the information they need in a timely fashion, you'll have a better shot at being treated fairly and accurately in their stories. Not that they're going to cut you a break. Say, well, I was going to point out that he stole that $50,000, but he got back to me at 2 o'clock, so I'll mention that. That's not the way it works. But if you're helpful, Robert Scott was the bureau chief for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. He's now the CEO of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana, one of the finest people I know. But I was nice to Robert, and Robert was nice to me, and I always treated Robert with respect. And there were several times when I was doing an interview with Robert when I was working for the governor, and I said something, and Robert, because I was a nice guy, and because I was nice to him, because I returned his phone calls and treated him with respect, Robert, on several occasions, Robert said to me in various interviews, "Now, Bob, I know you said this, but didn't you really mean that?" "Oh yeah, that's exactly what I meant," And he let me sort of, revise my remarks for quote and treat me fairly. Now, if I'd been a jerk to him and never returned his phone calls, he's still a decent guy, and he probably would have treated me fairly. But a lot of reporters, might not give you that extra benefit of the doubt, that extra little lifeline to help you rescue yourself, because honestly, they do know you didn't mean to say that stupid thing. And if you're working really hard on that relationship, you might get a break every once in a while. Reporters are very perceptive. If you hate them and regard them as the enemy, they pick up on that very quickly. While they try to be fair in their coverage of you, it's difficult to be objective about someone who hates you. It's just human nature. Lying to a reporter is the worst sin in press relations, and you will usually get caught, sometimes immediately. Who are we thinking about getting caught lying about not seeing a videotape? Just Roger Goodell. He didn't get caught lying about it 6 months later. It was like the next day. He interviewed CBS, and the next day AP says, "No, we sent, this law enforcement source said we sent that tape to you months ago." A skilled, aggressive reporter assigned to cover your department or your elected official is often a blessing. I told this to the mayor of Baton Rouge several years ago. He didn't believe me, and I'd like to go back and ask him if he understands this now. A skilled, aggressive reporter assigned to cover your department or your elected official is often a blessing. He will sometimes learn about problems in your organization long before you do. A good relationship with that reporter doesn't mean that mischief or improprieties don't get covered, but it could make the vital difference in who gets blamed and how you're portrayed in his story. Sometimes it might even mean learning about the problem in time to correct it or address it. And so when you make the reporter an enemy, he or she's going to be maybe less likely to tip you off to the fraud that's going on down in your accounting department. If you are a Republican, you are most likely, this is really true, and I've talked about this to my Republican friends who agree that I got this right. If you are a Republican, you are most likely hardwired to treat the mainstream press with disdain and deep suspicion. Most journalists are fairly liberal people, and Republicans know that. The creativity of your press releases or effectiveness of your media events pale in comparison to whether or how well you try to overcome a bias that will poison your relationships with the news media. And if I really wanted to help Governor Jindal out, which I'm not really interested in doing, but if I really wanted to help Governor Jindal out, I would tell him that, you got to do something about your relationship with reporters, because they're poisonous. They hate you. Because they think you hate them, and you treat them like they're the enemy, and they become the enemy when you treat them like the enemy. That said, it's possible to become too friendly with a reporter. You will usually regret this. One or both of you may be compromised in some way, or you will make the mistake of believing you have immunity from that reporter and her scrutiny. You probably do not. You'll drop your guard, you'll go out to drinks with this person, and you'll say something you regret. And it'll wind up in the newspaper the next day. And everyone will know where it came from, even if it's not for attribution, because they know how close you are to this reporter. Not every reporter is fair and ethical. Many are not. But trust and cooperation is a two-way street. The press secretary relationship is really no different than any other. Treat someone like the enemy before you know her, and most likely you created an enemy. It's a different way of saying what I'd already said. And finally, this is to me the most important rule in representing a public official as a press secretary or communications director or public affairs officer. You may think your job is to protect your boss and his or her reputation and advance his or her political agenda. It is not. And I wish someone had told me this sooner. It is not. You are, in essence, an officer of the court. You have a client, but your first duty is to the integrity of the system. Remember that when a reporter plops an unpleasant public records request on your desk, she's not asking for your records. She's asking for her records. So that's my little bit of wisdom there, and I hope it's been helpful. How many of you, by the way, have given any thought to taking these public relations skills that you've learned and taking them into a political campaign or a government organization? How many of you were thinking about that before I talked to you today? Oh, okay, well, I've dissuaded a few of you, huh? Well, I encourage you to do that. I think it's a great life. It's a great job. You meet really interesting people. You get to make a difference in a way that a lot of people don't. And I think you'll find that in journalism, politics, and I think PR to some extent too, but especially journalism and politics, that it's a very egalitarian kind of place, kind of business. And it's not about how old you are, what kind of degrees you have, it's about what you can do. And if you can do the job on the first day, they'll give you a lot of responsibility. And they're not going to ask you, let's see your transcripts. They want to know what you can do. And that's what I like about working in politics. Has anybody ever been to Capitol Hill? You'd be surprised if you go to Capitol Hill. The country is being run by people about 3 or 4 years older than you. I mean, Capitol Hill is awash with people right out of college who are running this country. And so it's a government work, and that government PR, government public affairs is a kind of job that welcomes young people out of college. Politicians and government officials are very amenable to people of your generation working for them. They want young people around them. One thing, they don't have to pay as much. That's part of it. But the other is that it's a very demanding job sometimes. It requires energy that people my age don't have. It's one of the reasons why I got out of it. I couldn't take the hours anymore. And young people have a lot of energy and are willing to give it the extra bit of effort that some people my age may not be willing to do. So you get reward, your youth and vigor and enthusiasm really gets rewarded in that field. So it's been a delight talking to you, and I hope I've left enough time for some questions or discussion.